Welcome back to another amazing coffee conversation. I'm personally really excited for today's conversation. I think it's such an amazing topic, and we actually wanted to do it back in February for Valentine's Day. But I think with all of the planetary shifts and alignments going on right now, I think this is a really beautiful time for this conversation.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah.
It always happens, when the right alignment comes. And sometimes even in February, we're trying to focus on Valentine's Day and all of that. But maybe this is the time when having this conversation for couples is really in alignment.
Like I said, today's conversation is all about cultivating those conscious relationships and looking at how we can walk that path of being spiritual and human at the same time in these relationships. And so today, Chantel and I are going to be sharing our own personal stories and experiences, the tips and tricks that we like to use to cultivate our own conscious relationships, as well as just some of the theory behind why cultivating a conscious relationship is so important and how it can be all of the nuances behind that when you're in the spiritual field and all of the different ways that that looks. So today's coffee conversation is going to be really beautiful and hopefully really uplifting. And I guess I can just kick us off. Maybe a good place to start would just be sharing a little temperature check of what our own conscious relationships are right now. So I'm engaged and we're getting married in November, which is really exciting. And whereas Chantel, my lovely friend here, you got married, was it last year that
Yeah,
you got
last
married?
year in May. Yeah. So I'm going on a year, which is crazy. But we've been together for 10 years. And then we finally were like, okay, you know what? Let's get married. We did a lot of personal healing in our relationship. But in my past, I was married for 20 years before I was divorced and then met my current husband. So yeah, so I can do the both sides of it.
Yeah, so
Being
you guys are
married
going to
for
get
multiple
some
years.
Yeah, you guys are going to get some really beautiful perspectives from kind of all sides of a relationship in this conversation. So I hope that just to start, maybe this would be a beautiful time to just take a deep breath, knowing that the
Mhm.
topic of relationships can carry a lot of emotional intensity, no matter where you're at in that journey. And so maybe now is a beautiful time to just take a deep breath and maybe set an intention for this talk together today. Setting an intention for what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you're hoping to take away from today? Maybe that's a technique that you can use in your own relationship. Maybe that's a connection to a feeling of peace around the topic of relationships. Whatever it might be, go ahead and just take a second here as we dive in to just really tune in and see, what does your higher self want for you today in this conversation? What do you want to walk away with from today? And Chantel, if you want to
Mhm.
take that and get us started.
I think that's actually a beautiful way of starting because I already see some comments saying that Bethany is going through a process of separation. So I can see the intention being set there for heart healing, for inner peace and stuff. And then we have Jeannie that's looking for a companion. And so I think across the board, we're going to definitely have viewers that are going to go from being newlywed like myself and fiancés like yourself engagement to being long-term relationships. And so this is a conversation that I think is going to be a huge spectrum across the board. And I think diving into conscious relationships is such a big topic because when we are not conscious in who we are, like if we're just diving into a relationship based off looks or based off finances, or we have like this checklist that when we meet somebody and we're like, okay, you meet all of my needs now, we're not necessarily meeting those spiritual needs sometimes. And I can say that from my experience. When I met my first husband, I had no conscious awareness of what I was looking for in a husband or a father to my children. I was looking for someone then and now. Oh, you're fun. You're cute. You're this. I want to like hang out with you. And 3 kids later, 20 years later, um, there was a lot of ups and downs that I could have avoided if I would have stepped into that relationship in a more conscious way and learned how to communicate at a younger age, learned how to listen at a younger age, and recognizing what my traumas and my triggers were also and how they were showing up in our relationship. So I think those are a few of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Um, with conscious relationships.
Yeah, I feel like when we talk about conscious relationships, I almost see it as these like two spheres of a relationship. There is that human side of how do you communicate? What do you need? Looking into the future, what kind of partner and what kind of
Kind of
relationship is going to
relationship.
serve you best? But then I think there's also that spiritual aspect of it too, like you were saying, of what's in alignment for you? What is your higher self calling you towards? And that trust around the universe bringing you what you need in each moment. And so, I look back across my own relationship history, and it's like I can see a lot of really dysfunctional and toxic relationships that I was in, but looking back, I value those so much because they taught me how to value myself, and they taught me how to really stand up for what I truly needed, as opposed to those surface level desires that were, like you said, rooted in traumas or triggers or things like that. And so I think there's almost two ways that you approach a conscious relationship. If there's that first element of trusting the universe, trusting that that person is going to show up when they're meant to show up, and then looking at, are our chakras aligned? Are our souls speaking to each other? Are we aligned in our morality, in our way of viewing the world, in our mindset, all of those topics? But then there is also that human aspect of, on a physical human level, are we aligned? Are we a match? Are we ready to create that foundation to move forward from? There's almost like that root chakra and crown chakra perspective that I
Hmm.
love bringing in. And I think it's one of those things where, if we kind of kick the conversation off with that trust in the universe and that alignment that you were talking about of is this person aligned for me? One of the things that I love about conscious relationships and being, what the mass spiritual community kind of calls awake when you're in a relationship. I don't love that term, but I think everybody knows what I mean when I say that, is that you have this understanding of the fact that you are your own whole person and this person is their own whole person. And can you continue to be whole together? And I think for me, that was the biggest switch that took me from being in a very unconscious relationship state and in a lot of toxic situations that were not healthy for either person involved into this relationship that I have now, which is beautiful and loving and kind and compassionate and very healing for each other. But it's this understanding that at the end of the day, you are whole, you are enough, you are loved, you already have all of those things. You're just making that, again, conscious choice to bring that wholeness into conversation with another person.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that for that is a really great way of putting it, because when you're whole, that's what you're bringing to the table, is a whole being. It's not a codependent relationship, which you can find a lot of times when we're not choosing our partners in a conscious way of, do you align with me? Do we have the same goals? Are we kind of on the same path, right? It's like frequency matches frequency. So if you're trauma, like if you're working from your trauma base and that is what you're seeking, then, because you don't always know that. That's where the consciousness comes into the relationship, is because you have the awareness of self to say, yes, I'm working at this level here. And so I'm attracting that same kind of vibration in a person, right? So when I found my current husband, I wasn't necessarily looking at all. Like, I had just moved back down south, literally 2 weeks before I met him. And as soon as we met each other, it was like, okay, now there was a 7 month gap because I knew I needed to go get myself like a job and a house and all the things and get my kids set up. But there was this spark with him that I knew, okay, and the awakened man, right? Doesn't make it an easier man, but an awakened being. I recognized that we had a lot that we could grow from and evolve from. And so, recognizing that, and even in our wedding, it was really neat because we aligned our chakras. So we had like a shamanic wedding, and we stood back to back and aligned all of our chakras, and but in a very high vibrational, very like like higher self-awareness of, yes, there's this separation, these two people are merging together in life, but not to depend on each other solely. But I think what happens is we have so many labels on our relationships. Like, does he meet your financial needs? Does he meet your sexual needs? Does he meet your emotional needs, your mental needs, all these things? And there's just a lot of expectation to come from a relationship. And I think that's where we get really kind of tripped up sometimes in a relationship too, because you want this person to be your whole being. And really, we have to look within ourselves. Can we show up for ourselves with some of those things? And then be in alignment to match their needs too. And I think that's where love languages come from, is
Yes.
if I know your love language and you know mine, then we're able to meet each other's needs and not be, I'm giving you what my love language is, and then it's not satisfying yours, and vice versa.
And I love what you were saying earlier about that idea of, we have so often in relationships, we have this list of these are all the things that this person needs to have. Or like you were saying just now, of are my financial needs met? Are my sexual needs met? Are my emotional needs met? Are my mental needs met? Like all of these needs and this checklist that we have of a person. And I always find it really interesting because the long distance, not long distance, the long-term relationship that I was in before I met my fiance was very much based on a list. I actually had a physical list that I had written out like years prior about like this is what I would want my partner to look like, to be like, to act like, to embody. And lo and behold, the universe in our universe of yeses was like, here's that person. Here's this person that checks off. I think there were two things on a list of like 75 that he didn't check
Oh,
off. Like it was very much aligned, except that it wasn't, because those needs and those desires and that list that I had created was created from a place of this is a person who can fill in my gaps, who can make me whole, right? Like it was this idea of I am a puzzle piece and there's another puzzle piece that's going to come and fit right into me and make me whole. And over the course of that relationship, I learned so much about myself and so much about the difference between that mental qualification of love of this person is going to help me be better, this person is going to make me whole, this person is going to understand my traumas, versus when I let that relationship go and I stepped more into who I was and into that power of myself and really spent probably a good 2 years working on myself and getting to a point where I felt like a whole person. When I met my fiance, I was adamant that I did not want to be in a relationship. I didn't want it at all. I was going to go travel the world. I was going to be single for the rest of my life. I was so excited to be the aunt that had butterscotch candies in her pocket and like crystals in her house. Like I was so set to be the weird, crazy aunt, which maybe I still will be. I don't know. But I was so aligned. I was so happy being single. And my
and the
mom
universe
actually,
said no.
I never said no, is the thing. She had been trying to get me to talk to this man for like a year. And it was so interesting because my mind was going, no, 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 I don't want it. And I could just feel it in my soul that like this is it. This is the thing that you do now. And so it was this immediate understanding. But the one thing, and this is such a stark contrast to how I went into my previous relationship, the one thing that I was looking for when I walked in to meet him for the first time was, is he emotionally intelligent? That was my one criteria. Everything else I let go of. Everything else I was able to just be like, I am whole. I am complete. I don't need this person. But in order to continue to stand firm in myself, in order to continue my own healing path, in order to continue to be a whole person, I need him to be able to be his own person too. And for me, one of the hallmarks of a person who has that kind of personality and who has that capability is someone who is emotionally intelligent, someone who can understand that, they have their own healing. And when if we had an argument that we have self-responsibility for our triggers, self-responsibility for our emotions, for our choices, for our actions in the relationship. And I think that that's such a beautiful way to approach a conscious relationship, is thinking of what to you is that signifier, that little flag that's going to tell you this is a relationship that I could continue to be whole in. Because I think there is that aspect of, like we were saying earlier, it's so important to be whole in yourself, because a relationship that's rooted in needing the other person is a
Mhm.
relationship that is rooted in deficiency. It's rooted in that victim mindset, for lack of a better term, of I'm not complete in myself. I need this other person to complete me. And that is, no matter how healthy and beautiful the relationship is in all other aspects, that is ultimately a codependent relationship in a way, because you feel unworthy unless you have this person showing you that you're worthy. Whereas when we can step into a space where we know that we are worthy, that we are enough, that we are whole, that we are healed in ourselves, then when we step into a relationship, it's an upliftment. It's uplifting each other, it's cultivating each other, it's growing together instead of relying on each other in that way of I need this person to be whole.
Yes. When you were talking about the your list, immediately I was like, oh, okay, the mental list. You know, I think we all start with our mental list, and then the heart steps in, the spirit
Mhm.
steps in and says, okay, well, what do you need that's going to fulfill and help to cultivate this part of ourselves? Because that's the vulnerable spot, for ourselves to be able to step into, to be able to trust in another human being to come forward and love us in a way that is cultivating for us, right? And so I think one of the topics we were talking about that kind of got this conversation going was in my relationship of having a safe word. And so when you're talking about having two people and recognizing your triggers, so for me, I'm very much in this place in my life of self-awareness that when I am triggered, I actually take a moment for myself to look at that, because I've learned and recognized my triggers are not about the other person. The triggers are about myself and what I need to be healing within me, and not to do the blame game and all of that. And how easy it is to do that when you have a partner. You know, you live life together, you share life together, and I'm going to blame you for everything because I'm not happy or whatever it is. And so my husband and I, we were going through a couple things, and we're not big fighters, but when it gets uncomfortable and we're just not feeling it, I didn't like where it was going. And the one day I was like, we need a safe word. And our safe word is laugh. And what that has done for me, for us in our relationship, it's given us this boundary because we actually defined what it meant. So we chose a high vibrational word. So the moment you hear laugh, you're already lifted up out of anger, because it's like, okay, laugh, laugh, laugh. And then it's like it changes the entire energy of the room, for one. So it's like laugh or smile, or any word that really, love, whatever it is that you want to choose. But it's like a moment of timeout. So the moment either one of us says that word, we stop the conversation. We take a moment to ourselves to feel what we're feeling, to process our emotions, and then we can come back to it. And when we do, everything is a lot calmer, right? Because we're not in that trigger response of wanting to just latch, like yell at each other or whatever it is. But we come back to each other in a much calmer state. And so that has really changed so much. And I have to say, like, our argument, we don't even have an argument. We don't even have a tiff. We're not anywhere with it, because it has shifted the conversation in our home, which I highly recommend for anybody that is having any kind of pattern, because that's kind of like how that works. You have these patterns of arguments or conversations or whatever it is, and then it kind of takes a hold of the relationship. And if you don't recognize it, it can destroy the relationship, because you're not just talking about this topic. Now we're talking about all the topics throughout all of our history. And that can be extremely overwhelming in a relationship, and very heavy on the two, people in it.
And I love that idea of having something that uplifts the energy of the room or of the conversation, because I think the way that I view relationships is, we do live in a universe that it is love and it is light and it is all of those beautiful, positive, loving vibrations that are constantly flowing forward. But when we step into a space where we're triggered, or we're in an argument, or we're dealing with a difficult emotion, or we're having a bad day, or whatever it is, we start to kind of push back against that flow, against that alignment and love of life itself, that flow of life. And when we're in that space, I think that there's an expectation that we've cultivated in the realm of relationships, that we are supposed to push through it. That if we have an argument, we need to
Mhm.
talk it all out right now. That if we don't, you know, if we're having a heavy emotion, we need to get to the bottom of it right now. We need to tell our partner exactly what we're feeling right now. There's very much this urgency to it. Whereas I don't think life force energy, you know, we could bring Reiki into the conversation here. If I don't think it has that urgency, it just is what it is. It's just flowing forward. And what I love about the idea of a safe word, or for my fiance and I, we will grab each other's hand in the middle of a conversation, and that's kind of our signal of when one of us does that, we take 3 deep breaths. It doesn't matter if we're in the
Mhm.
middle of a sentence, it doesn't matter if we haven't finished our thought. If we grab each other's hand, we take 3 deep breaths and we come back into it. And it's just this kind of like pause and reassess of, are we going with that flow? Are we aligned with the direction of love and light or laughter or whatever it is? Or are we pushing back against it? Are we holding on to our triggers? Are we holding on to, you know, our self-righteous anger? Or are we holding on to
Yeah,
the
the
fact that we
ego.
had, right, the stories that we tell ourselves? Are we holding
Yes.
on to that? And if we are, can we let it go and go back into the flow of life? Because as soon as you do that, it doesn't matter if you're still in a disagreement or you're not on the same wavelength, you'll find each other again. But as long as you're pushing back against it, there is going to be a resistance. There is going to be a lack of communication, a lack of trust, and also a lack of emotional connection. And so it's inevitable that if we're pushing back against that alignment, somebody's going to get hurt. And so if we have something,
Mm.
whether it's a safe word or 3 deep breaths or whatever it is, that allows us to really check in and say, are we going with that flow? Are we aligned in the right direction? If this conversation continues to go in the direction that it's going, is it going to end up where we want it to be? And I think that question, whether it's in terms of a conversation or the relationship as a whole or a situation, like with your family. I know that my fiance and I have
Mhm.
a lot of conversations about his relationship with his family. It's not an easy situation right now, but it's asking that conversation or asking that question in the context of conversation, a relationship, a situation of, if this continues in this direction, if this energy continues going the way it's going, is it going to get us where we want to go? And I think that is at the root of so many relationship, I don't want to say dysfunctions, but dysfunction where it's not functioning correctly. And sometimes the answer is that it's not because that relationship isn't what you need. Sometimes the answer is it's not because we need to step back into that self-awareness and claim our self-responsibility and step back on track with that flow. But I think that having that mindset of, you know, our energy is the blueprint for everything. You know, our external reality
Mhm.
is just an internal reflection. And so looking at, okay, is this argument, is this situation, is this feeling, is it something that I can take and I can rework so that that energy is flowing in the right direction, so that I can create a space where I can openly express what it is I'm feeling or what it is I'm saying without the other person taking it on as their own, which I think is another big part of conscious relationships, is when we have so many self wounds, right? If we aren't stepping into a relationship feeling worthy, or even if we are, right? We're all human. We all have triggers. We all have places and
Yes.
spaces where we don't feel whole. But when we're in that space, if someone touches on something that touches on one of our own bruises or one of our own wounds, we kind of want to take that on of like, oh, this person's feeling anxious, it must be my fault, or whatever that looks like. And I think there's such a huge component of this kind of pause point that looks at, can we have these conversations? Can we cultivate a space where I can express my emotions and the other person can express theirs without taking it on as a reflection of my own worth or of my own action or of my own whatever it is. And I think that looks different for every person, right? For me, that's very much, I'm currently working through releasing my abandonment wound. And I feel like I doing a really good job of staying conscious in it. But, even last night, my fiance and I were talking, and he said something completely innocent. It wasn't even related. He just had said something about an anxiety he was having that day. And about 30 minutes later, I could feel it in my body. My heart rate was going, my shoulders were tense, I was clenching my jaw. And we were in the middle of a completely unrelated conversation. I just took his hand and I was like, this is a feeling that I'm having. Can we take 3 deep breaths and let me get to the bottom of it? And so we just stopped. We stopped and we sat and I breathed through it and I was like, I found what it is. You saying this about your anxiety pinged in my brain as maybe you're anxious about us. And we had a conversation about it. And it was this space where he knew that it wasn't a reflection of him. I knew that my anxiety wasn't a reflection of reality. And we were able to almost detach a little bit from those emotions, walk through them together, and then come out on the other side and we were fine. And that entire,
Yeah.
exercise took maybe an hour from start to finish, from his comment to resolution, but that hour was so impactful, and it's something that we have tried to cultivate very consciously in our relationship is we have a 24-hour rule of if something's bothering us, we have made an agreement to bring it up within 24 hours. We don't necessarily have to fix it in 24 hours. We don't necessarily have to have a full conversation about it if it doesn't feel aligned, but we have to at least get
Mm,
it in the open because having those things inside that kind of fester and perpetuate is, like you said, going to perpetuate that pattern or is going to keep you pushing against that flow.
yeah.
And that's where those dysfunctions start.
They do. And I think that that's when you're stepping into your divine feminine and your divine masculine. You're showing up as your higher selves for each other. And I think what happens a lot of times too is we go off to work, we separate as a couple in the morning, and we go do our day to day, and we show up as our higher self when we go to our work. Our coworkers get that version of ourselves. Our bosses, our clients, our customers, whatever it is we do in life, we separate. We go into our workforce and we give the best of ourselves to everybody outside of our home. Then we come home and we're exhausted and drained, and we want to like, here's everything I went through today, without being conscious on how is the other one feeling, or how am I affecting you with the energy I just pulled in. Because say I go and have a beautiful day and everything is just totally in flow, and then my husband comes home and he just wants to throw everything out on the table, and I'm not ready for that, right? Well, for me, what I started doing is I want to leave it at the door, right? Like, let me discuss it if I need to, but I leave the emotions and the energy at the door. So when I walk in, I can be that fresh start for him, or like we come together and can, I always like to do like where we do a 5 to 10 minute check-in. Like no matter what we got to do, even if we're rushing in to do dinner, do this, do that, whatever, and reconnect from the day's energy. Because if you think about it too, we have these cords that are attached to each other, right? Hopefully love cords, not like toxic cords, but these love cords, and we're stretched through the day with them as we separate, right? And then when we come back together, we got to bring that energy back together and be whole again within the space within our home. And so those are things that we do. But I also believe, coming from a marriage that was toxic, there is a breaking point. There is a point where we have to put our own self first. And so I want to say that these are really great tools for people to use and to bring into their home, their relationships and everything, but also to recognize that sometimes one is more advanced than the other in their conscious awareness of what a relationship should look like. And so there is that time of it where the contract, so to speak, is over, and there's just nothing else you can do with it. But having these tools that we're talking about, having these the ability to show up in your relationship as the divine feminine and the divine masculine can really create a beautiful balance, because you are bringing the best version of yourself to the table. And I think that's like what you're saying, holding the hand, taking that moment, taking the deep breaths, having the safe word, having a timeout, whatever it is that feels in alignment to your relationship is what cultivates that relationship and what helps it grow and helps it evolve. But not where we feel like it's a society rule that you got to be married for life because you committed at 18, but here you are in your 40s and completely miserable and not in alignment. And so having that too, to where the healing then comes back to self. And as we know with Reiki, when you heal yourself, heal your world. You have the ability to heal the worlds around you, which are the people in your life, right? You have that ripple effect. So when we're working on ourselves, the consequence of that is also working on your husband or your wife, right? That is the cause and effect, because we live in the law of cause and effect. So if I'm working on me, I'm going to have that impact on my husband as well. And hopefully he will tune into it so that we can work on each other with, and ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And I
Absolutely. And I
think that
think that
idea of, you know, being our higher self and working on ourselves in the context of a relationship is so beautiful, but it's also like you were saying, that idea of alignment in your relationship of what was aligned at 18 might not be what's aligned at 40, And I think there's two aspects of that. Of there's the one aspect of that idea of our soul contracts and what our soul is here to experience. And I think sometimes our soul is contracted to have those toxic experiences, to have those imbalanced experiences, so that we can cultivate a balanced one in the future, so that we can grow, so that we can learn that lesson. And I think there's an inherent knowing there when we're in those experiences. And this is why it's so important to do that work, to connect to your own intuition, to connect to your own soul, however that looks for you, to be able to know, is this what I'm needing right now? Is this the experience that I'm meant to have? And with that said, I think a lot of times when we're in those experiences that maybe from the outside seem more negative, we aren't conscious of it at the time. It's almost always in hindsight that we're able to look back at that and say, I understand now why I needed to have that. Now, sometimes we are conscious in the moment, but a lot of times it is in that shift of we get to that point, whether it's, that 20-year mark, or maybe it's 2 months later, but we hit that point in our relationship where that shift happens, where we're no longer in alignment, and we can feel that. We all have, no matter where we're at on our spiritual journey, we all have that inherent powerful wisdom of knowing when we're where we're meant to be and when we're not. And I think when we hit that switch, part of cultivating a conscious relationship is also cultivating that conscious relationship with yourself of, do you understand yourself? Can you understand your own triggers? Do you have that self-awareness and that self-worth to be able to say, no, this isn't in alignment anymore? And this is something that I think no matter where you're at in your journey with relationships, whether you're in a long-term relationship or you're looking for someone that you can partner with, something that my fiance and I do that I really love is we've made this vow to each other that every day we're going to wake up and treat it as if the person next to us was a new person. So that we're never basing our relationship off of what it was yesterday, because it's constantly, we as people, that energy is constantly flowing, constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly evolving. And that's as it should be, right? Going back to that idea of, are we in alignment with the flow of life? Life is always moving us forward into new situations, new aspects of ourselves. And so if we're holding on to who we were 5 years ago as the basis for our relationship, that's going to cause us issues in the long run, because we're not going to be those people for very long. We're different people when we wake up in the morning than we were when we went to sleep. And so we have this vow to each other, this promise to each other, that every day we're going to try as much as we can to see that person as they are now, not as they were, not as they could be, but as they are now. And I think that idea of putting that drop of presence into, whether it's your relationship with yourself or your relationship with your partner, of where are we at now? What's in alignment now? Are we flowing now? And if not, is it because it's no longer in alignment at all and it's time to move on? Or is it because we've just forgotten what it's like to be present with each other? And can we shift back into that? And that's again where that balance comes in of tuning into your intuition, because we're constantly in relationships kind of on that seesaw. I think if there's that intuition in the middle, and there's both ends of the spectrum on either side of that really beautiful, committed, conscious connection. And then when it's time to be separate and to be only in ourselves, and we're always kind of watching that seesaw go back and forth, but it has to be rooted in that intuitive connection, because otherwise it's like you were saying at the beginning, it's just mind based. It's just
Mhm.
based in fear. But if we can drop it down, if we can root that relationship in our souls and in our intuitions, then we're always going to have this structure, this foundation, this balancing point that we can come back to, that we can realign with. It's almost like a litmus test, if you will, for how far have we gone in one direction or the other, and is that where we want to stay? Is that where we need to stay? And is it still balanced? And that having that checking point can be so powerful, whether it's, if you're in the process of finding someone, or you're in the process of splitting, or you're in the middle of a really deep long-term relationship, always going back to what's happening now, not what could it be or what was it, but now. Is it still in alignment now?
Yeah, being in the flow is really important. And especially with women, because we're fluid, our energy is more of a fluid energy than most men. We're separate, we are different energies. And doesn't mean that men aren't fluid either, but women are. And so it's hard to say, like, we can wake up one day and just, today I'm going to wake up grumpy, or tomorrow I'm going to wake up this way, whatever it is, because our emotions are more fluid. And so, and recognizing that too. And I love the idea of who are like waking up and accepting who you are for the moment, for today, right? Because yes, something can shift overnight. Who you were yesterday, today I had an aha moment. I had this epiphany in life. I had this different understanding. I woke up with a different perspective, or releasing things that was holding me back, old stories again. When we start releasing old stories in our relationship, in ourself, our life, we become the observer of those stories rather than owning them and wearing them like a badge of honor. It completely shifts the personality. And that's for anyone. So it's like, if you feel stuck at any point in your life, and you look at what you're holding on to, what you're carrying with you, recognize if it's time to let that stuff go, because those stories can hold you in a time in your life that you don't even exist in anymore. And so then it's like giving thanks to the version of yourself that was walking that lifetime, that timeline, so that way you can move forward into who you are now and who you're becoming. But it's really releasing it. And sometimes, people get very attached to that, and that in itself can be a trigger. Like, well, this happened and that happened. And yes, we've all gone through those. I've gone through a lot of experiences in my life that, very traumatic or not pleasant or whatever. But there comes a moment where we have to recognize that it is time to release those, because all we're doing is sitting here, our hands are full. How do you accept anything new? How do you receive new energy, new people, new alignments, if you're still aligning yourself with that old version of yourself? And a lot of times that old version of yourself isn't even hanging out with the same people. Like your whole world has shifted, but you're still trying to stay the same person you were 10 years ago. And that is so much work. And when you show up like that in your relationship, there is no room for growth and evolution and all of that. And so it really is diving into the heart. It is recognizing what's ready to go. It's working with your energy. It is, Reiki based. My home is very Reiki based. I'm sure yours is, and a lot of our listeners. And it's Reiki in your home. It's being Reiki, living Reiki, because that divine energy, that source energy of who we are, it really cultivates this huge bubble of life and energy and love that, I know and remember what it felt like pre Reiki, to not have that experience, to not have that bubble to fall on into, and to cultivate that for myself. And it's a lonely way of living, it just is, because I feel now it's like, okay, I can take a moment and do some work. I can I can now put in my mind's eye what I want. I can set the intentions for my day. I know I can give myself a time limit of how I want to feel. Like if I'm feeling upset, angry, whatever it is, here's my time frame. And then I can move on from it. I'm going to process all of my emotions in that moment. And now I can shift into a different alignment of energy. And when we can do that, that's so conscious in the state of being in which you want to be in. So it's really like, Like I have this lady I work with, she's like 80 and she gets so stressed out and angry. And I'm like, you're 80. You don't need to be angry. Like you don't want to like transition out of life angry. Like be happy in what you're doing. And she stopped for a moment. She goes, you're right. Like I don't want to be angry. And I'm like, don't be angry then. It's okay. Like just recognize where everybody's at, and that has nothing to do with you. And you can walk on by like it's all good, and instead of owning what other people's triggers are or what they're having issues with.
Mhm. And I love that idea of you can let it go. I've been doing some really beautiful studies of mythology and how it ties in with psychology, and it's fascinating, but one thing that's come up as a theme is that hero's journey. And that's a really common writing technique, but it was founded in mythology, and those kind of three spheres. There's many steps in there, but there's that severance, threshold, and integration. And severance is that process of, what are you ready to let go of? What are you releasing, so that at threshold you can have that experience that changes you, that allows you to become a new person, that where you really do step through that doorway of, this is who I was, but I'm not there anymore, and I'm going to own that. I'm going to release that. I'm going to step into and claim who I am now, so that when I step back into the world, when I step back into this relationship, I can then
Mhm.
integrate it all into this new version of me. And I remember when I first started, actually, in that first relationship I was talking about, where I had that list, I had this moment where I had been feeling so triggered, and it had been such a difficult situation because of some of these, past traumas and stories that I was holding on to. And I was walking around this park, and I just had this moment where I realized that my mind is only ever going to have the context of the past. My mind can only rely on past experiences. And at the time that I had this realization, my past experiences in relationships were all negative. I had yet to experience a healthy relationship. And so I was noticing this in myself, of my mind is only ever going to have context for the negative things until I choose to give it a space to experience something new, until I give myself the chance to prove my mind wrong. And that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of willingness to let go of who you are. And there's this visualization that I love. I want to say that it comes from Brene Brown, but I think I'm wrong. But she talks about holding a pencil in your hand, visualizing that you're just holding a pencil, and it has written on it whatever the thought or the story or the trauma or whatever it is. And she's like, if you're willing, you just flip your hand over and the pencil falls. But the trick is being willing to let yourself flip your hand over. That story can't stay if you choose to let it go, but it's the choosing that takes courage. It's the choosing that takes that energy and that willingness to step into something new. And I love that visualization, because you can look at it. You can look at that pencil in your hand and realize that the only thing that's keeping that story, that trauma, that energy alive is the fact that you're not willing to flip your hand over. And it was
It's
something
like the
that,
snake biting the tail.
yeah,
The snake
yeah,
biting its own tail. That's what we're doing. We're just biting our own tail.
right.
Self-harm.
And it was something that I loved seeing in my relationship with my fiance when we first started dating. Is it was a very, at the time, it was a very triggering situation for me, but there were so many times where we would be talking, and I would literally say to myself, I could feel it inside myself, of, this is a moment where you choose to hold the pencil, and it will ultimately eventually lead to it ending, or you choose to put the pencil down so that this can continue. And it was this really beautiful awareness that I had of, it might not end now, it might not end tomorrow, but eventually, if we hold on to this story, if we hold on to this trauma, if we hold on to this energy, it's going
It's
to cause problem, it's going to cause a break. But if we can let it go, if we can have the courage to say, I choose differently, then this gets to continue. You get to see where it goes. You get to stay in that Reiki bubble, in that flow of life. And I think that's, whether we're talking about a relationship with another person or a relationship with ourselves, I think that's always the choice that we're faced with is, are we going to choose to hold on to it because that's what always has been, and we don't want to let it go? Or are we going to choose to have that courage to step back into the flow of life and flip our hand over and let that pencil fall and see what happens on the other side? And it really is every day, no matter how long you've been with your partner, it is constantly this courage to face the unknown because every time you wake up, every time you release a story, every time you work through a trauma or you face a new aspect of your healing, every single time, it's the unknown of we don't know what's on the other side because we're breaking those cycles. We're stepping out of that old energy. We're finding something new. And that's where going back to that heart-centered relationship or that soul-centered relationship is so important because our hearts, our souls, our intuitions, they are not afraid of the unknown. They're not afraid of
Mhm.
something new. They know where we're meant to go. They know what happens when we're in the flow of life. It's just our mind. It's just those stories that keep us stuck in the fear. And so if we can choose to drop those, if we can choose to release those and to drop down into ourselves of reconnecting to our heart or our soul or whatever that looks like for you and step back into that flow, that fear releases, the stories release, the traumas release, and we find ourselves somewhere that we never would have expected because we've stopped expecting things for ourselves and we've started accepting things for ourselves. And that's a
Mhm.
big difference.
It's a huge difference. And self-healing is so important to not even current relationships, but future relationships, friends, family, partner relationships, because the thing is, if we don't heal ourselves, the man that we leave or the woman we leave, we will reattract that same quality of person into our life because we're not healing us. So to level up, so to speak, we have to heal ourselves to be able to attract a different person into our life, to attract a different circle of friends, to attract, different opportunities is us evolving within our own self of healing so that we can be in the alignment of those who are already doing their own personal work, their own self-healing. And in the end, that's what it is, because whether you're talking about a partnership and marriage relationship kind of thing, or just people in general, if we are doing our work, we get to create this beautiful platform for ourselves to welcome these like-minded people, these heart-based people, instead of being in the trauma and the drama and everything that I think a lot of us have experienced or are experiencing, and when you're in it, it's really hard because life is here when you're in the trauma and the drama of it. When you open up that space of heart and healing, it really expands outwards. And then you can see people coming at you with red flags like, okay, I don't have time for that one, or I can't do this. And it's not in judgment. It's just knowing what your boundary is. It's knowing how far out you can spread your own energy and what you're willing to accept and deal with, because people can be extremely draining. But at the same time, I believe in, we are the mirror reflection of ourselves. We meet those people, so they do. That's what the trigger is what in you is triggering me, because I need to heal that. And also going back to soul contracts, I do believe in that. My ex-husband, he was, um, as long as that was, there were lessons in that relationship I needed to learn so I could cultivate the current relationship consciously that I'm in. But I also had children with him. And I believe those children were meant to come through the two of us. Um, my issue is I held on to it too long. And I think that's where it's also coming to that point of being a conscious person and recognizing I've done everything I can and it's all good. Like we can separate, and knowing that, yeah, that part's over. But coming back to self-healing, because in the end, that's what I chose, was to heal me, work on me, because then you get illness, disease, different things start to happen, anxiety and overwhelm, and all of these unpleasant experiences start to happen in your body and your field because you're dealing with something that isn't in alignment anymore. And that's where you get dis-ease, right? Where you're not easy in yourself, you're not easy in life, and it creates illness. And it's not to blame on the other, but really to put the responsibility on ourselves. Why am I making myself sick to be in a situation that doesn't even make me happy? So it's really just, again, coming back to yourself and recognizing what makes you happy, what makes your brain tick, what makes your heart full, and doing that in your home, in your relationship, and seeing what happens. And if there's healing to be done, it will be. And if not, then you're working on yourself, and that's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah. And I love that. I love this idea of, those stories, those traumas, those triggers, they might not be our fault, but they are always, always our responsibility to heal.
Mhm.
And that idea of self-responsibility of, we're not going to blame, we're not going to fall into victim mode, we're not going to say, well, it shouldn't be that way. There's an element of acceptance there of this is how it is, and I can choose differently. I can choose differently for myself in my own life, in my own energy. That responsibility of change and cultivation is always on ourselves. Like, yes, it takes two to tango, but it takes one person to heal. It takes one person to
Mhm.
heal yourself, and you can't heal anyone else but you. And so when we step into that place of self responsibility, and this is my healing journey, these are my stories that I'm telling. Are these really the ones that I want to be telling? And knowing that in each and every moment we have that choice of coming back into ourselves, back into, is this in alignment? Yes or no? And allowing whatever answer is true in the core of ourselves to be enough and to follow it. That's the responsibility that we always have to ourselves in our healing journey. And so I know we're coming right up to the end, but Chantel, I'm so curious. I would love to wrap it up with each of us kind of sharing. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's trying to cultivate a conscious relationship, what would it be?
Mm. Patience and communication. I think those are two of the most important, is having patience for your partner and where they are in their day and in their moment, and to be able to communicate in a way that is um, recognizing what our voice represents, the frequency that it represents, the vibration that it brings in, and to come from the heart to really cultivate that. What's
That's
yours?
beautiful. I think I would say something really similar to what you said there at the end of coming from the heart. I think I would say always look at yourself first. If there's something uncomfortable, if there's a question that you have, if there's anxiety, fear, sadness, whatever it might be that's causing you to feel like you aren't in flow in that relationship, look to yourself first instead of trying to find the answer outside because I think I can say probably 100% of the time, it's something in you. Even if the answer is that you're just not in the right relationship and it's time to go, that wisdom, that answer is still going to be found in you. So always looking to yourself in order to shine out into that relationship and in order to cultivate something. It seems a little counterintuitive, but I think when we have that perspective of being able to go within and really looking at where is it in me so that I can bring this to the table in a conscious way instead of projecting it out. That's when true healing and that's when deepening in our relationships happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for tuning in, for listening. I would love to hear your takeaways, your aha moments, or your tips and tricks for cultivating a conscious relationship over in the Reiki Cafe community Facebook group. You can post your own post or comment on today's video that you find there pinned to the top. Otherwise, thank you all so much for the honor and privilege of your time today. I hope that you found this conversation as uplifting as we did. I always love coming together for these conversations, and I'm so grateful for everyone listening. I hope you have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time on Reiki Cafe Radio.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.